My name is Jessie. I am the National Director of Programs at Pet Partners. Welcome to our Facebook Live that we call Volunteering with Your Pet. I am going to go ahead and just ask some folks if you're here yet. I know that we literally just launched it, but it's always helpful for me to know if there are other folks listening in. So if you want to let me know things like where you're from, that's always helpful. I also like to know if you have a pet that you're considering pursuing Pet Partners volunteerism with, that you tell me what kind of pet it is. Specifically, is it a dog? Is it a cat? Is it a horse? Um, and I'll kind of watch for those comments to come in. It's always useful for me to know who is out there. Um, in terms of what we're going to cover today, this is a session that is mostly designed for those who are not yet volunteers with Pet Partners but want to be. And so I go over things like what does therapy animal volunteerism look like? And then I move into what are the requirements? And then finally, what is the process to actually becoming a volunteer? So that's how I plan to go through today's session. I will stop at various points in time and check the comments for questions. So you can just keep those coming as you have them. No need to hold them to the end or anything like that. So the other thing I want to say is, even though this is for prospective folks, it's always nice to have current volunteers here if you are here, and you should definitely feel free to hop in the comments and share your experiences or help me answer questions from your perspective. Always love having our current folks here to kind of share their wealth and their wisdom with those who are determining whether or not Pet Partners is right for them. So I see Julia and Trish and Donna and Aaron. Awesome. Looks like we've got cats and dogs. So not surprising there, dogs are our most common species. They make up about 94% of the animals registered with our program, but you will see later that we register a number of other species after dogs. Cats and horses are the most common. We are very welcoming to our less common species. We always wish we had more of them. In fact, one reason we hold this volunteering with your pet session is to introduce even non-canine owners to the concept of therapy animal volunteerism. So again, I'm Jessie. Welcome to Volunteering with Your Pet. And I think we will get started with the actual content. So the first thing I want to talk about is what therapy animal visits look like and where they take place. So up on your screen, you will see a list of some of the common facilities where our team with their animal and they become a registered team with Pet Partners. When they're registered, they can go into these facilities sort of on our behalf. And the majority of facilities are going to require that you are registered with an entity because, of course, that demonstrates to them that you as a team are suitable, you're safe, you're effective, and usually it comes with insurance as well, which we'll talk about a little bit at the end. So when you are a team, you go out and volunteer in facilities like those that you see up on the screen. This is not an exhaustive list at all. This is just some of the more common places where teams visit. And really, the purpose is to kind of spread the healing power of the human animal bond and engage with the people who are either living at these places or going to school in these places or are participating in a program in these types of places. And you come in, you bring your pet, you share your pet with these people. Next up, I want to talk a little bit about the types of therapy animal visits we have. So once you're kind of in a facility, what might a visit look like? And we have a number of different ways visits can kind of play out. Up on your screen are the most common ones. So the first you'll see there is social visit. And when I say social visit, certainly that sounds casual, and in many cases they are. But also remember that in some settings, social visits can be deeply impactful. Think about doing a social visit in a nursing care facility where residents aren't living near their family or don't see their family as often as they would like. Sometimes bringing your pet in and visiting with them might be the highlight of their day or the highlight of their week. It's an opportunity to kind of cheer somebody up, bring a smile, give them something to look forward to, motivate them towards something. So again, there's a lot of impact in social visits, and you'll see a lot of our therapy animal visits kind of fall in this category. Kind of at the other end of the spectrum is our visits that are more formal in that they might take place in a physical or occupational therapy setting. And in these cases, there's a professional involved, again, maybe a nurse maybe it's a physical therapist, an occupational therapist, maybe a social worker. And obviously, they're responsible for sort of the human that they are treating or meeting with, but they may invite volunteers to come in and assist with some of the work they are doing with their clients or patients. So, one example of this is maybe somebody's at a rehab center and they're undergoing physical therapy and they need to work on their fine motor skills, right? Using their hands and their fingers again. And a therapy animal team might be brought in, and the person will practice some of those fine motor skills by brushing the animal. So this is a situation where, as a volunteer, you're kind of pairing up again with a professional in a more formal setting to kind of bring some of those benefits to the people receiving the visit. The third type you see up there is reading programs. These are extremely popular. So literacy-based visiting. And this is where you may have even seen it in your local library or your local school. This is where a therapy animal team will come in and somebody can practice their reading skills by reading to an animal who obviously feels much less judgmental, or there might be less pressure involved with doing that for a person who's learning to read or who's practicing reading skills. Again, also, it can be a motivating factor. So even for a learning reader who is confident reading, it's still a great motivator to practice. So we'll typically see these Read With Me visits happening in libraries or schools. When you become registered with Pet Partners, complete the registration process. Now you're authorized to go out and visit. You can actually opt into our Read With Me initiative. It's free of charge, and there is kind of extra education and extra support to help you think about how to make your reading visits most effective for the people you're meeting with. The last type I want to highlight are stress breaks. And interacting with an animal, as many of you probably know, can reduce stress, even short-term interaction. So you'll see a lot of our teams visiting in places where stress can be high. One example, our teams visiting in many airports throughout the United States where people can be experiencing travel stress. So that's a really common type of visit. This, again, just like the last slide, is not exhaustive. There are other ways that our teams visit, but these are just the most common that we see, and some of the first types that new teams will take on is especially those social visits, the reading visits, the stress breaks. Those are usually pretty comfortable place for folks to start. I am going to pause and just look at the comments and see if there's anything I need to chime in on, and then we'll move on from there. Great. So it looks like we've got some existing handlers here. That is so great. Like I said, make sure that you are chiming in, sharing your experiences. Like maybe right now, if you want to share the places that you have visited, current volunteers, and I know for some of you, you're very long term. I recognize some names. You've probably visited at a lot of different facilities, but maybe just share with some of our prospective teams some of your favorite places to visit and sort of how you did that and what you enjoyed about it. But I don't see any specific questions I need to address right now, so we'll move on to the next slide. Which I believe covers our species. Yes. So as I mentioned at the top of the call, when I was asking folks what kind of animal they had, I do just want to make you aware that we register 9 different species. We are the only organization to register this diversity of species. And there can be some really wonderful things that, say, a rabbit or a guinea pig can do that maybe a dog can't. Or people who will feel better engaging with a cat. Maybe you're visiting a nursing facility and one of the residents had cats their whole lives, and that is a really special thing for them to talk about and to revisit. And so having a cat present can be really lovely for that. Um, so again, I know we have mostly dogs here, but just so you all are aware, we do have other species out there that you may encounter when you're visiting. Or if you know of anybody who has one of these species, let them know that we do register these less common species because so many people just aren't aware. We can go to the next slide. So I've covered so far kind of where you visit, what a visit looks like, and now I want to talk about kind of your commitment as a handler. Kind of what are you giving to the organization? What are you giving to the facilities where you visit? And ultimately at Pet Partners, we really believe that volunteers should be empowered to kind of design their own volunteer journey. So you get to arrange visits yourself based on your schedule and availability. The only policy we really have related to this is that you cannot visit, meaning you can't go into a facility with your animal for more than 2 hours a day. And the reason for that is the vast majority of therapy animals will be fatigued at the end of that 2 hours. There might be a rare animal who could go and go and go, but even those of you who might have really boisterous, spunky young dogs, therapy animal visitation and engaging with so many people in an unfamiliar environment can even be tiring to animals that fit that profile. And because we are so committed to animal welfare and well being, we never want to treat our animals like tools or like employees. It's very important to us that we make sure that visits don't push them past their limits. So that is the one thing, is you cannot visit more than 2 hours a day. Again, current volunteers would love to hear from you about how long you visited each day that you went in, because so many volunteers I hear from don't even come close to that 2 hours. They might do 60 or 90-minute visits. Um, those handlers with pocket pets or smaller animals like guinea pigs and rabbits will often do 45 minutes because for those species, sometimes the interactions can be a little bit more tiring. Outside of that rule, it's really up to you how you do it. So if you're somebody who is maybe retired, or you only work part-time and you want to volunteer a lot, you can absolutely visit every week or a few times a week if you like. If you're somebody who's just busy, even though you're passionate about this, it's okay to volunteer once a month or once every few months, or maybe you just volunteer at special events in your area. All of that is okay, and it's totally up to you. And then in terms of finding facilities where to visit, we do have in our volunteer center, which if you don't have a volunteer center account yet, I highly encourage that you get one. Somebody can throw up the link for how to directly access making that account, but it's pretty easy to find on our website as well. When you set up that free account, there's all sorts of resources available to you, but one of them is our volunteer opportunities directory, where facilities come to our website and they post, "Hey, I need a volunteer at this school in this city and state. Here's my contact information." So that is one way to find visits. Another way to find visits is in many communities, I think we have about 60 community partners, which are sort of like local cohorts of volunteers that work together. If you feel like you want to join a community partner, it is absolutely not necessary. But if you want to, oftentimes those community partners will distribute visiting or volunteer opportunities to teams. So that's another way to find them. And then additionally, people will just find facilities on their own. So if you have a child in school and you know that therapy animals are common in schools in your area, and they really are common in a lot of places, maybe not as much right now with COVID, but you certainly can approach them and say, "Hey, I am a registered therapy animal volunteer. Here's my insurance. Here's the calls. Would you ever be interested in having me come visit your school or nursing home or whatever else it is that you're interested in visiting?" So there's a number of ways you can find those facilities and be able to set up your schedule. And in my experience talking with facilities, some of them have formal programs where it might be an actual therapy dog program at the hospital. And they may have some of their own requirements for how often you need to come in and things like that. But in my experience, most facilities are just really thankful for your time. And there is usually more demand for teams than there are teams. So if you're somebody who doesn't have a lot of time, usually the facility is going to accommodate you. They're going to say, "You only want to come once a month for 90 minutes? That works for me. I'll take whatever you can give." Um, just a couple other things about the time commitment is just to keep in mind that both before and after the visit, you might want to uh, build in some time in your schedule. On the front end, you need to make sure your animal is groomed and bathed. That's for infection prevention and control purposes. We always want animals that are going into these facilities to be as clean as possible. On the back end, just remember that your animal is likely to be tired. And so you want to make sure that you don't make plans for doggy play dates or plan on a really long walk or hike. You just kind of need to think about the days that you visit or that you volunteer, to kind of think about what it's going to look like before and what it's going to look like after. And that is all I have to say on the commitment. I'm again going to hop over to comments and just see if there's anything I need to address. So just hang on one sec. See, she has a dog and bunnies. Marcy, if you haven't already, it'd be really interesting to hear kind of how you manage your volunteerism with the two species differently. I'm super curious if I'm right to say, I think I am, because I've heard from other volunteers that, how you schedule a visit with your rabbit is going to be a little bit different than how you schedule a visit with your dog. So feel free to hop in there. I always find that stuff interesting. Yes, Carolyn Collins, I see your comment. That's a great idea. So new volunteers in some areas where there are existing volunteers who are open to it, you certainly can shadow another team before you visit. When you shadow, my personal recommendation is that you go without your animal because then you can really focus on the other team. If you're trying to go shadow with your own animal, sometimes you're split between kind of watching them and advocating for them, but also trying to pick up maybe what the more experienced volunteer is doing. Um, you certainly do not need to shadow, though. That is more if that would make you feel more comfortable. And again, if it's available in your area, we have plenty of teams who don't do that. And those teams will often take a strategy of, before their first visit, let's say in your community, you're going to go to a nursing care facility, and that is scheduled for 2 weeks from now, and it's going to be your first visit. First thing, make your first visit short. Do not schedule it for 90 minutes. It'd be fine to even schedule it for 30 minutes just to get a lay of the land. And even before you go on your first visit, you can ask the volunteer coordinator, whoever your contact is at the facility, you can certainly ask them, like, could I come without my animal and just take a quick tour so I sort of understand where I'm supposed to check in and when my animal's supposed to go to the bathroom outside? Because a lot of times, if you get those things figured out, it makes your first visit a little bit easier. If you can't actually get into the facility before you have your first visit, sometimes a simple phone call and having somebody just talk you through some of that stuff can be helpful. It's just a heck of a lot easier than coming in and trying to figure out all the logistics and kind of take care of your animal. Um, so, looking again here. Okay, let's move on to the next slide, if that's okay. So again, so far I've covered what visits look like, what your commitment is like when you volunteer, when you visit. And so now let's get into the questions you need to ask yourself if everything I've told you sounds appealing. Yes, that sounds great. That's what I want to do. Now you need to kind of think about, is my animal eligible, and kind of what are the steps I need to take to make this happen. So in terms of eligibility, these are the questions you need to ask yourself. For age, pocket pets, again, that's our smaller ones like rabbits, guinea pigs, and rats. They must be at least 6 months old. All other animals must be at least 1 year old. And that means before they evaluate, and I'll show you in a minute where the evaluation step happened. Essentially, the evaluation is kind of the last step, and then you get your registration and you can go out and visit. So you can't show up at an evaluation with an animal who's younger than a year, and then younger than 6 months for those species I talked about. Additionally, you have to consider how long you've owned the animal. For birds, they must have lived with the owner for at least a year. For all other animals, it needs to be at least 6 months. And of course, this is to allow you time to really get to know your animal and sort of deepen that bond before you kind of go on this journey. If you have an animal who's less than a year, or if you've had an animal who's lived with you less than the required amount of time, but you are just really excited to get going and you don't want to wait, I do suggest that you take the required handlers course, which we'll talk about in a moment. It is part of the registration process. You can absolutely start that before your animal is eligible, and it is a way to kind of further educate yourself on what this volunteerism looks like. That way, once your animal meets either the age or live-in requirements, you're not then now starting the coursework. You've already completed it. So that is an option. Animals must be reliably house trained. And this, it doesn't matter if you're visiting kind of indoors or outdoors, they need to be reliably potty trained, and waste collection devices are not allowed. There is some exception for birds, but I don't see any bird handlers on here, so we won't get into that. Animals must be on a leash at all times. Again, doesn't matter if it's indoors or outdoors, always on a leash. And that goes not just for dogs, but for some of our smaller animals too. So if you have a cat or you have a rabbit, they need to be on a leash as well. Animals cannot be fed a raw protein diet, and they cannot have a history of aggression. And then for the safety of your animal and the people that you visit, the animal needs to be in good health. And when we think about good health, there's a couple of things you should consider, and we would also consider if it's something that needs our consultation, is of course, does the animal have a disability? There are many animals in our program who participate happily and successfully with a disability. The main thing is, does the disability cause discomfort? Again, back to that animal well-being and welfare. Just because someone wants to do the visiting doesn't mean the animal should be forced to or be put into a situation where they're comfortable. So that is something to consider with a disability. And then we also consider, does the animal have a kind of long-term health issues, especially those that require medication? There are some animals, again, who visit happily and successfully who are on maintenance medication of some sort, but there are medications that are disallowed because either they create issues for your animal, meaning they can cause them to be more immunocompromised, or they can cause the animal to shed pathogens. So from a infection prevention standpoint, that's not safe for the people that they're visiting. So if your animal is on a medication and you're unsure about it, we do have some information in the resource library, which I'll tell you how to get to that. But if you're unsure, just contact us, preferably earlier in the process rather than later, because the last thing we want to do is tell you when you're almost ready to evaluate, sorry, that medication isn't allowed. We'd much rather tell you that earlier. So please do feel free to reach out to us. But also, if you want to kind of review some of the information about medications, again, you can go to your Volunteer Center account. Right on the home page is a big box that says resources. You can type that in. And you can't put on your specific medication. You won't necessarily get information about it, but you can review health requirements in some of those resources. Um, and then the last one's about obedience skills, which we are actually going to be hitting in the next slide. So I'll leave it for that and let's move on to the next one while I take a peek at some of the comments coming in. Great. Okay, good. Thank you, Julia, my colleagues in the background putting comments up, and she did put up therapy animal program requirements on our website. Um, so that's good. I see a lot of conversations here about bathing and grooming. Okay. So if your animal meets the requirements, then let's talk about some of the more kind of intangibles or the things that, can't be listed like the last slide. These are more things about your animal's temperament and personality. So animals who participate in therapy animal volunteerism must be people-oriented, sociable, and friendly. I always say, though, big asterisk here, with strangers. So I before I started working at Pet Partners, I thought I wanted to volunteer for them with my former dog. And I thought, oh, he is all of these things. He is calm, he's cool, he's collected, he's engaging, he's cuddly, he's super manageable, his obedience skills are great. But when I actually stepped back and reflected, I realized not as much when he first encountered a stranger. It took him a little bit to warm up, and that made him not suitable for therapy animal volunteerism. Maybe that's something I could have worked with him over time, maybe not. But it really is about strangers because these are you may go to the same visit the same facility every week and start to get to know people, certainly, but also we are registering and insuring you based on the fact that your animal could encounter strangers and still be people oriented, sociable, and friendly towards them. That doesn't mean that even the most experienced, perfect therapy animal is going to love every single client or patient or student they encounter. They may not, but they do still need to be um, at least sociable towards those people and kind of reliable and comfortable. But on the whole, your animal should be really comfortable with strangers and people kind of coming and going. They must have good basic obedience skills, and these are species specific. So for a dog, that's going to look like sit, stay, down, come when called, um, loose leash walking. All of those are really important. No jumping, no reactivity to other animals. If you don't have a dog, the species specific obedience skills might look a little bit different. And you can again find those in the resource library. So you log into your Volunteer Center account, click resources, type in rabbit if you have a rabbit, and you will see our species overview packet where we kind of walk through behavior related to rabbits in that example. You can also look at a rabbit score sheet for our evaluation where you actually see what obedience skills are tested. So be sure to check those out if you are a non-canine handler. I do want to really clear, we're not looking for obedience superstars. So you don't have to have completed 3 obedience courses or have successfully completed the Canine Good Citizen. We're not looking for that level. If you have it, that's great. What we're looking for is strong basic obedience skills that create an animal that is reliable, that's predictable, and that is manageable. Um, this third bullet kind of already refers to what I talked about at the beginning, that they may not love everybody, but they need to remain calm at all times. And then more often than not, we hope that they're, of course, sociable and friendly and outgoing as well. And then the last bullet point, I think, is relatively self-explanatory. The reason we say animals is because on a therapy animal visit, you might see another therapy animal, or you might be in a facility that allows pets to come visit, right? So I know there's some nursing care facilities that will allow people to bring family pets in, or you might encounter a service animal, or an emotional support animal. So encountering animals in public now is super common. So therapy animals need to be able to remain neutral to them at all times. All right, let's hop to the next one. Oh, I'm just seeing a comment come in. Yes. So Sherry already made a comment here about handlers and what they need to do. And so, yes, you're right. We always talk about the fact that the team is both members and the animal is only one part of the equation. And there would be many people who argue that the human end of the leash can, in fact, be more important because you are somebody who can predict your animal's behavior. You can proactively make things more comfortable for them. So, using that example that I talked about before, where maybe your animal isn't super comfortable already, can you predict that that happens before the person gets close to your animal? If you can't, can you intervene and say, Fluffy is not feeling great right now, so we're actually going to go over here and maybe we can see you next time. So handlers are a huge part of keeping therapy animal visits safe and a huge part of keeping their animals comfortable. So I'm glad that you brought that up, Sherry, and I do want to talk a little bit more about what makes a successful handler. So of course, they also need to be friendly, professional, and polite, and be used to kind of making conversation with strangers. That's going to happen quite a bit. The predicting and redirecting their animal's behavior. Again, I can't say it enough, and I know we have some super experienced handlers on the live here with uh, dogs that we might call bulletproof, meaning they can handle almost anything. But even those animals are going to have situations that they don't like and that they may not respond wonderfully to. Can you redirect your animal's behavior in that kind of situation? Again, we always focus on the animal's well-being. This is a team. Just because you as a handler are having a great time on a visit doesn't mean that your animal is. And are you aware of that? And are you adjusting for them? And of course, we want all of our handlers to follow pet partners policies and procedures. I already talked about the 2-hour rule. That's an example of a policy. Keeping your animal leashed at all times. That's an example of a policy. Of course, there are a number of others um, as you can imagine. Um, in terms of learning more about what makes a successful handler, we have coursework to help you do that. So we will set you up for success in this regard and help train you, if you will, to be a successful handler. But these are some of the things you can expect to learn and some of the sort of qualities you do need to come in with to a degree. Let's go to the next slide. And folks, I think I have about 3 more slides. So we're getting to the end here if hearing my voice is getting to be a little bit too much. I know sometimes all of this information feels like a lot. This slide is just an overview of the main steps of the registration. We call a team registered with pet partners when they complete the entire process, and then they as a team hold a team registration. This is not every single step. There are a few other steps that aren't listed here, but for the purposes of brevity, I kind of want to focus on just a few of the most important ones, which is step 2 and step 4. So that's what I'm going to go over in the next slides. So we can move on if everybody's had a chance to see that. So handler training, this is what I was just talking about in the last slide, which we want to set you up for success in being a handler. So every new handler needs to take this course prior to registering with pet partners. You need to take it prior to evaluating with your animal. That's where you go in person in front of an evaluator. We'll talk about that on the next slide. There are 2 different ways that you can take this course. Who will take you through the content. It's typically a pretty full day. A lot of people like this format because you have somebody in front of you that you can ask questions of. There are certain things that might be demonstrated in person that can be nice. We don't necessarily have workshops available in all areas of the country. If we don't have a licensed instructor near you, we can't offer the workshop. Also, as you can imagine with COVID, even though we are operating and things are happening, workshops aren't as frequent as they used to be. We do hope that that changes sometime in the near future. But you can also take this course online. And in that case, it can sometimes take quite a bit less time just because you don't have the other people in your kind of classroom asking questions, which that's a positive thing. But from sort of a brevity thing, it's kind of you and the course and moving through it at your pace. And obviously, the online course is available to anybody. So for those of you who can't find a workshop right now, or there's not an instructor in your area, it's a good option. And this training focuses on the human end of the leash. It is not about your animal. So if you attend an in-person workshop, you don't bring your animal with you and work on training with them. It's about you as a handler. How do you learn to be an advocate for your animal? How do you learn to tell their signs of stress so that you can predict that? How do you, how do you manage your animal's behavior better? How can you make good conversation and engage with clients, patients, and students? What conversations are inappropriate to have with clients, patients, and students? It kind of covers all of those things. So the natural question I get when I say it is the human end of the leash is, well, how do I train my animal? And ultimately, again, this is a situation where Pet Partners empowers our handlers to make that decision for themselves. First of all, because if you are a non-canine owner, we can't tell you, oh, you should go take a formal therapy animal course. There aren't therapy animal courses as we want to be inclusive and make sure that everybody can meet our training requirements, meaning, they set up the training themselves and they can do what they need to do. The second reason for that is animals are coming into the situation in kind of wildly different circumstances. We certainly have a lot of 1-year-old dogs coming in, but their needs are going to be very different than an 8-year-old dog coming in terms of how they train for the things that we were looking for in a therapy animal. An 8-year-old might be much calmer and the obedience skills might already be very set. We certainly don't want to require people to go back and redo things if it's not necessary. So training your animal is really up to you. And some people will enroll in formal classes. Other people will kind of design their own training plan. If you are going to design your own training plan for your animal, my biggest piece of advice is to take your animal into unfamiliar settings as much as you can. So if there are pet friendly restaurants or patios near you, take them there. Take them to the Home Depot if animals are allowed. Take them into PetSmart frequently. Take them to a school, and you can't go on school grounds, but take them to a school and walk around the playground, walk around the perimeter when children are around. This is a way to expose them to a lot of the different environments they might see on a therapy animal visit. My second piece of advice is to do your training with a lot of distractions present, because when you are visiting in a hospital, for example, suddenly an alarm might go off or things might beep, and you want to make sure that your animal, if you ask them to sit down, because you need them to sit down, that they will sit down, even when something is kind of going on in the background. Current volunteers, if you have any other things to say about training you did with your animal prior to joining Pet Partners, happy to hear from you all on that. Next slide is about the required team evaluation. So I gave you kind of the overview of steps, and a lot of those steps can be done in whatever order you please, but the coursework needs to be done before the evaluation. That is required. And the evaluation is where you and your animal go in front of a licensed team evaluator and you move through about 25 exercises that help us assess or help our evaluator assess both your skills and your aptitude. So when I say skills, I'm typically talking those obedience things. And when I say aptitude, I mean aptitude for what is going to be seen on a therapy animal visit. So in the aptitude portion of the evaluation, you will see things like somebody approach your animal using a walker or a wheelchair or a piece of medical equipment. That's to help us ascertain, is the animal comfortable being approached with this kind of equipment, which you will see in almost every setting that I said, I think, on the very first slide. You'll also have somebody make a very loud noise. Again, how does your animal respond to that? With that particular exercise, your animal may startle a little bit, and that's okay. But what we're going to watch for is, how do they recover? And how do you, as a handler, help your animal recover from a situation in the evaluation that might not be comfortable, because that's what you're going to see on visits. Um, So again, skills and aptitude are the things we're testing. If you log into the Volunteer Center account, click resources, type in score sheet, you will be able to see kind of samples of our score sheet or the exercises that you will see on the score sheet at least. One big thing I'll say in closing about the evaluation is that it is, you will get a final score. It will be, passing, or it will be not ready. Not ready means that just that day you didn't demonstrate the skills and aptitudes to go forth. Doesn't mean you can't come back and try again. Your evaluator will help talk you through that. But that final score is 50% handler, 50% animal. Every single exercise, both of you are receiving a score. And there might be times that your animal scores better than you, or times that you score better than your animal. But again, it goes back to what I keep talking about, which is the human end of the leash is so important. And we are looking for you to be proactive in how you handle. We're looking for you to advocate for your animal. If you don't do those things, even if your animal's a rock star and knocks it out of the park on every single exercise, you will probably get a score of not ready because that was your score on all of the exercises. So it is really common for new handlers to focus a lot on their animal, and my animal is going to be so great for this, and they don't pay as much attention to their role. I've seen it a number of times where somebody will come into an evaluation room and they'll say, my dog loves everybody and they love everything and nothing throws them off. And so they kind of stand back during the evaluation and they don't step in and say, during one of the exercises, he doesn't really mind having his paws touched, but he'd prefer if you touched over here. Even that kind of communicates, yeah, my dog can handle all of this, but I'm going to tell you what my animal likes even better. And that's how you can best guide the interaction. So you will see those things in the evaluation and you will want to demonstrate that you understand them and you can do them in the evaluation. I think that's all I have to say about that. And I think we've got our last slide coming up here, which is the benefits of registration. I'll just allow folks to read those. The biggest one, at least from the perspective of like you need it or you can't do it, is that we do provide liability insurance for all of our teams when you are out visiting. And 99% of facilities, one of the first questions they're going to ask you is, are you insured? Can I see your insurance certificate? Because they need to have teams insured before they come on premise. So that is one of the biggest benefits of your registration. We will provide that for you. You don't need to search for your own insurance or deal with any of that. And then, of course, I have some other things listed up there as well. I am going to scroll through the comments and see if I can add anything. You all have been very busy in there, which is great. If you can hang on, I just want to read. And keep them coming if you have other questions. So yes, somebody asked for clarification about the Canine Good Citizen test or the CGC. No, pet partners teams do not need to have that. It is not a requirement. If you've heard otherwise, it might be because a local group recommends it, meaning a local group of volunteers or pet partners folks might say, hey, it's really good if you do this first, but it is not a requirement. We will not ask for proof that you have passed the CGC or anything of that nature. So thank you for asking that clarifying question. How long does it typically take to complete the background check? Oftentimes it's just a few days, but each background check kind of relies on a different set of state laws and kind of how those work and which different parts of the background check need to be pulled. So sometimes it can take a little bit longer, but it's not super long. So Mike, if you have more questions about that, or if you feel like your background check has been held up, make sure you reach out to us. Carolyn, good comment. Watch for the licking of their lips. So Carolyn is referring here to a stress signal that you might see in your animal. The handlers course will talk a little bit about common stress signals that you will see in your animal. We also have a canine body language class that dives into this even deeper in terms of looking at a number of different things. But understanding your animal's stress signals, and some of them are common, meaning across a certain species, you might see that most animals have the same stress signals. Licking lips is a really good example of that. But you might also find that your animal has a specific stress signal that is kind of unique to them. Or you might find one that is commonly thought of as a stress signal actually doesn't always seem to be one for your animal. So it's good to know the generalities, but really, like I said, when I talked about kind of designing your own training program, when you get them out in different places that they aren't used to, and when you put distractions in front of them, you will start to pick up stress signals a little bit more than you would, say, in your own home, or you would in the places that they usually go to, like the dog park, where they may not show as much stress. And that's how you kind of start to learn and pick up on those cues. I know there were other questions coming in, but it looks like my colleague Julia answered a bunch of them. Yep. Bellin is actually one of our therapy animals. That's his name. So the Facebook account is underneath that. They recommend training classes. I do hear that a lot from volunteers, that they like going to a full class. And it may not actually be a therapy animal 101 class. It might just be an obedience class. Heck, it might be a tricks class or an agility class. But those things can really help your bond. And many animals look forward to them. So it becomes kind of exciting to get out of the house and do something new and interact with people. So it can be really great from a bonding perspective. And then, of course, you have a trainer in there giving you different ideas. So by all means, if you're somebody who responds well to others' guidance, you can certainly think about taking a training class. Even a basic obedience one can kind of get at that bonding that we're talking about here. And yes, that was a therapy llama. We do register llamas. We don't have a lot of them, unfortunately, but we do have a few. I have not yet, in my 6 years at Pet Partners, met a therapy llama, unfortunately, but some of my colleagues out in Seattle have. Okay, just scrolling through. I just don't want to hang up. This isn't a phone call. I don't want to log off before I make sure I answer people's question if they've got them. Looks like, how long does it take to get my credentials? It's been over 3 weeks. Okay, so Carolyn, I'm not sure if you're asking how long does it take to get your badge. If that's what you're asking, it can take up to 8 weeks, unfortunately, right now, with the way processes are happening and some slower shipping times and production times and things that make up the badges. But when you register with Pet Partners, meaning you complete the whole process, you pay your registration fee, you will get an email letter attached that says, this is a registered team, this is their name. You can also use that letter to begin visiting. You do not need to wait for your badge. So I'm not sure if that's what you're asking, or if you're just talking about when you'll hear from us after you've submitted your registration materials. Okay, I see, you said badge. Okay, so don't worry about the badge. You will get it, but it'll be a longer wait than you would prefer. You can go ahead and use that welcome letter. To my knowledge, Julia, you can chime in if I'm wrong, I don't know very many facilities who have any issues with it being a letter rather than a badge. In fact, we recommend that you always keep your letter with you because the badge has less information on it. But if you run into a facility who's like, no, I really need to see that badge because the other teams have the badge, just have them email us, or you can email us and CC them, and we'll say, nope, she's cleared to visit. She's going to get her badge in a couple weeks here. Is it okay to bring your dogs to supervised dog parks while being a part of Pet Partners? So yes, absolutely. We don't necessarily restrict your behaviors and what you're doing with your animal outside of your volunteerism, if that's what you're asking. It is totally okay if your animal enjoys dog parks, that you certainly could take them there. We would recommend, of course, they're up to date on vaccinations and things like that, but I'm sure you would do that anyway, even for a pet. But yeah, that's totally fine. When you volunteer for us, you need to follow our policies and procedures. And when you're not volunteering for us, I always say a therapy animal is just a pet. There's nothing necessarily more special about them than the dog down the road, and you can treat them as a pet in the normal ways that you would. So I hope I'm answering that correctly. With that said, it's been almost 45 minutes, so I am going to log off. I really appreciate everybody's time and the wonderful conversations in the comments. I hope that this was helpful. If you have any further questions, please let me know. My email is up on the screen. You can also contact us from the website. At the bottom of every single webpage on our website is the Contact Us button. Click that. It will get to a wonderful team of individuals who are here to help you. And we really hope to see you as